Let us now talk about iconic brands and cultural equity. In the past video, we talked about how culture is represented in many things, and one of those things was brands. So in this video, we're going to go deeper into that understanding of cultural meanings of brands. But let's start with an example. Have you ever wondered why Coke consistently outperforms Pepsi? Coke and Pepsi have been around for almost more than 100 years, and they've been fighting each other for many years, but consistently, Coke is ranked more valuable than Pepsi. We can take rankings like those by Forbes or Interbrand, and Coke is always in the top 3 or 4, whereas Pepsi lags behind in places 23 to 30 to 29. But why is this? If we think about it, they're almost identical. They are a very similar product. There's actually been studies in which people have done blind tests of Coke and Pepsi, and they cannot really distinguish between the two. Even when loyal followers of each brand try to test either product without knowing what's in the cup, they really cannot distinguish systematically. So the products are almost identical. The channels are the same. They are sold through the same channels. You find both Coke and Pepsi in vending machines, in grocery stores, supermarkets, restaurants. They have very similar price, and they share the similar communication approaches. In many cases, the commercials are very similar. But Coke still dominates. Why? Well, we're going to argue that one reason for Coke's dominance is that Coke is perceived more as a cultural icon than Pepsi. In other words, consumers perceive Coke to be more culturally meaningful than Pepsi, and hence Coke is said to have higher cultural equity. We're going to get deeper into this understanding of cultural meaning and cultural equity in the next minutes. But when we think about cultural significance, then we think, for instance, for Coke, how much Coke embodies the values of American culture and how much Coke is thought of as an American icon. And when we analyze that, we conclude that Coke has more of an Americanness to it than Pepsi has. But Coke is not only a symbol of American culture. Coke is also a symbol of the global culture, or what we refer to as a global icon, or an icon of a global way of life, more so than Pepsi is. So that's one of the elements that we're going to be discussing in terms of what cultural meaning is the extent to which we associate a brand with a set of values as nurtured by a culture. So this cultural significance we're going to capture in the term that we refer to as cultural equity. Cultural equity is going to be then distinctive knowledge in consumers' minds about the cultural significance of a brand that leads to a favorable response to the marketing of the brand. These favorable responses can include choosing the brand more consistently, as in, if I have Coke and Pepsi, I'm going to choose more consistently Coke over Pepsi because I perceive Coke to have this higher cultural significance. Or it could also be paying more for branded products. Either way, it's going to be an element of cultural equity. It's that notion of responding more favorably to the marketing of a culturally significant brand than to one that lacks this cultural significance. But what are the drivers of cultural equity, or the dimensions of cultural equity? Or in other words, what does it that endow a brand with the power of cultural equity? Well, the first thing, obviously, is a country or region association. If we think about Coke and Pepsi again, both are associated with America. So in that regard, both could be cultural icons. But as we're going to see later, there is more to it than just simply country or region associations. But this idea of establishing a connection with a country or a region is one important aspect of cultural equity. And brands use this in a variety of markets. For instance, we can think of the brand Häagen-Dazs. That sounds like a European premium chocolate brand, but it's really a brand from Minneapolis-based General Mills that just adopted the name Häagen-Dazs to associate itself with a region of the world that is more compatible with the hedonistic value of eating ice cream that the brand wants to put forward. We could also see that at a regional level within the country. For instance, if we think about the regional brand Lone Star in Texas, it's sometimes promoted as the national beer of Texas. So it's a brand that has built a very strong connection with a sub-region of the United States in the hope of becoming a cultural icon for people of that region. We can also think, for instance, of Volkswagen. It's a German brand that emphasizes in its slogans the power of German engineering, the German connection, to again endow the brands with values that are associated with a German culture that are beneficial for the technological advanced expertise of the brand. Or local brands like Caribou Coffee, that is very popular in the upper Midwest and the regional Midwest of the United States, that has also built a strong connection by being originated from that region and growing in that region. So brands use this notion of country or region association to start building cultural equity. But it is not enough for a brand to be a cultural symbolic brand by only have a regional or country association. There is more to it. Specifically, sometimes brands aspire to become global icons. And then globalness perceptions can be another driver of cultural equity, particularly for brands to aspire to be global players. We think, for instance, Apple or Coca-Cola are brands that, although are both Americans, are embraced by consumers throughout the world in a very close connection. Sometimes not thinking that the brand represents the country, but represents a global lifestyle of sophistication, of freedom, of hedonism. Then brands that become global icons often have to have this global reach and this perception of encapsulating what we call the global identity. We're going to talk about this in future videos in a little bit more detail, but I want you just to think that it's not only regional connections or country connections that can lead to cultural symbolism, can also be this notion of globalness. But a brand that is global or a brand that is strongly associated with a country or a region doesn't necessarily reach the level of a cultural icon. Because the next thing that a brand needs to be, to have high levels of cultural equity or to be culturally symbolic, is to embody the abstract characteristic of the culture, such as values or beliefs that are agreed by the culture. If we go back to the Harley-Davidson example that I used in the past video, then we said that Harley-Davidson is an icon of American culture, not only because Harley-Davidson is an American brand that is well known to be originated from the United States, but also because Harley-Davidson embodies ruggedness and freedom, which are important values in American culture. Then it is easier for Harley-Davidson to become an American icon than it is for another American brand that doesn't embody these values that characterize the culture. We can take another American brand, for instance, Nike. Nike is associated with superior athletic performance, independence, freedom, status. Then these again are values that are important in American culture. Then when a brand embodies those values, it becomes more likely that it can reach the highest level of symbolic meanings for the culture. We can analyze that or contrast that with brands that originate from other cultures to see how this changes dramatically. For instance, in Venezuelan culture, a Latin American country with a vertical collectivistic orientation, one of the biggest iconic brands is a brand of corn flour. The name is PAN, P-A-N. Well, this is a brand that the image that has built is around family connections, tradition, maintaining the tradition of food consumption in the culture. Then, in a vertical collectivistic culture that emphasizes values of tradition, maintenance of the status quo, respecting familial relationships, then that image is very likely to resonate with people in the culture and then facilitates for the brand to elevate itself to the status of an icon. So then embodiment of abstract characteristic of the culture is a very important aspect to build an iconic status or to build cultural equity. Finally, the ultimate level of cultural equity is reached when a brand exercises what we refer to as cultural authority, or the brand becomes an authoritative member of the culture to talk about important issues that are happening in society. And what we refer to here is this idea of a brand becoming an actor in a cultural conversation. And this is something that really distinguishes brands that reach the highest level of cultural symbolism from those that have just started to develop a culturally iconic image. Let's illustrate this with a couple of examples. Let's take, for instance, Budweiser. Budweiser is an American icon, not only because it symbolizes values of independence and freedom that are important in American culture, or because everybody knows that Budweiser is an American brand, but Budweiser has been a brand that historically has been inserting itself in the cultural conversation to push forward ideas that are important for American society. We can remember that during times of crisis in America, Budweiser have developed uplifting messages in which tries to teach its fellow American consumers that there are better times ahead and that we can overcome anything that happens to us because our culture is very resilient. So when brands establish that connection based on a cultural conversation, they become more of an authoritative figure that then elevates the brand to the status of an icon. Something similar has been done by Harley-Davidson, a brand that I've used in the past as an example of American iconicity. Harley-Davidson has also embedded itself in the fabric of American culture and through advertisements have tried to push forward issues that are important for Americans, and the brand has become as this catalyst of cultural conversations that facilitates then embodying the brand or equating the brand with the meaning of the culture. So, what have we learned in this video? First, brands can acquire cultural meanings and become symbols of a culture that are especially favored by consumers. We refer to this cultural symbolism as cultural equity, or the extent to which the brand embodies cultural meanings that elicit a more favorable response by consumers. These more favorable responses can be choosing the brand over a competitor or paying more for a branded product. Cultural equity is determined by 4 different brand aspects. First, a country or region of origin association. That's kind of the baseline for establishing cultural equity. Globalness perceptions, if what a brand aspires is to be an icon of the global culture. But on top of this, the brand has to build embodiment of abstract characteristic of the culture, such as values. It's not enough the country or region of origin connection, it's also connecting itself with the values that are important in the culture. Finally, the ultimate level of cultural equity is achieved when the brand exercises what we refer to as cultural authority, or when the brand is capable of speaking as an authoritative member of the culture about important cultural issues.